Greetings and blessings. Hello again, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to another teaching of the new Christian, new believer, or even the for the seasoned believer and the seasoned Christian, because we can never know too much about God, and we can never know too much about how to please Him. So I am Dr. Mckeel, co-pastor and first lady for NBCM Church of Louisiana, where Pastor Anthony Mckeel is our overseer. Well, let's see what was put in my spirit to talk on this time is about. We're still continuing with partial obedience. And in this particular lesson is going to lean toward more of the grumbler, the grumbling obedience, that thing we do, but we kind of murmur and grumble about it before we do it. We're going to call that grumbling obedience. So this lesson is not so much as to the non-believer as it is to the believer. Like I said initially, hopefully it will give you some further insight into one's own self and to see if a corrective action needs to happen in that area. Because let's ask yourself, if you were giving an exhortation to an obedient people, what temptations would you urge them to guard against? Most of us, me included, would most likely say, watch yourself, don't get in danger of pride or self-righteousness. Would you agree? I hope so, because as we read our Bibles, in the letter to the Philippians, Apostle Paul, is addressing an obedient people. Unlike, when he was writing to the Galatians or the Corinthians, Paul does not write to them in order to rebuke them and correct substantial failures and errors. Outside exhorting a few arguing women, as you read the Bible, you will see it just isn't a hint of what he says to some in the Galatians when he called them, "Oh, you foolish Galatians." You'll see this in Galatians 3:1, or, "Are you not of the flesh and behaving only in a human way?" Now, this you'll read in 1 Corinthians 3:3. But instead, to the Philippians, Paul is saying, "As you have always obeyed, so now not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence." And this is in Philippians 2:12, because the Philippians are an obedient people. So, how does Paul exhort them? What does he see as a key danger for these obedient people? So, if you turn to Philippians 2:14-16, it may read like this: "Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God, without blemish, in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life, so that in the day of Christ you may be proud that you did not run in vain or labor in vain." Does this sound like anyone you may know? Just think about it for a few seconds. A major temptation, for the obedient in my opinion, as well as I guess Paul's, is to murmur and grumble in obedience. Now, that's not why Paul says to do everything without grumbling or disputing, without murmuring or complaining, without sulking or arguing, like pouting, without whining or back talk. Listen at that. A temptation for an obedient people is to offer frustrated, grumbling obedience. In other words, Paul is clear that how we obey matters. That bears repeating. Paul here is clear that how we obey matters. The spirit beneath our actions matter. God's standard and expectation for us isn't merely to obey, it's to obey all the way, right away, and doing it cheerfully, of glad heart. Okay? All the way and right away. All the way and right away with a happy heart. I repeat, all the way and right away with a happy heart. This means that partial obedience is disobedience. Let me repeat that again, too. Partial obedience is disobedience. Delayed obedience is disobedience. And grumbling obedience, irritated obedience, frustrated obedience is disobedience. And it's crucial for us to press this truth into the corners of our lives. I'm going to call those out again because this is going to keep a lot of people in trouble with God. And that's where you don't want to be. You always want to stay on the side of his blessings. That's really where you want to try to stay. So this is where you need to not be so you can stay there. Again, partial obedience is disobedience. Delayed obedience is disobedience. And grumbling obedience, irritated obedience, frustrated obedience is disobedience to God. We each have various sources of hardship and frustration in our lives. Who know, it might be your boss or a coworker that you just, oh God, you just wish probably wouldn't come in that day. It might be a tone of voice or an annoying habit from your spouse or child or parent or sibling or friend. It might even be a deep unmet desire, like the desire to be married. But whatever the frustration, how often do you find yourself attempting to obey God while muttering and murmuring about the hardship? How often is there a hint and a hitch in your obedience or an edge to your obedience or self-pity in your obedience? It's like we say to ourselves, I'll do the right thing, but there will be enough reluctance and grumbling accompanying, our obedience that everyone will know what it's costing you to do it. And I know many of you know what I'm talking about. So, and now some of us grumble directly, about God. Why is he doing this to me? Or we grumble about our circumstances, you know, conveniently forgetting the truth that nothing comes into our lives except by his hand. And others of us grumble about people. We disguise our complaints about God by focusing them on the people around us. And we have all sorts of rationalizations for this. I'm not grumbling about God. I'm just being honest about the failures and the sins of other people. Oh, really? Really? Oh, really? That's what you're going to hang it on? Okay. This is precisely where we must press on the believer. It is important to distinguish the faithful groaning from ungodly grumbling, lamenting. You got it? From sulking, groaning, again, lamenting. They can be faithful responses to real pain. So, what distinguishes them from grumbling and sinful complaining? Often, it's honesty. Do we take the pain to God directly, or does it come out sideways as complaints about God's wisdom, disguised as observations about other people? The key question here is, where does the pain go? Do you bring it to God as part of offering yourself totally to Him? Or does it simmer on a low boil in your soul and come out in a frustrated service and soaking obedience? These are good questions that we should ask ourselves. We can press this truth even into our marriages. Simply put, grumbling obedience is a marriage killer. Mumbling exposes that you're in the comparison trap and that you're keeping score. Which of us has the tougher job? We come with questions like that in our minds and maybe out loud. Who has sacrificed more? Grumbling and complaining is an outworking of self-pity. That's subtle and sneaky form of selfishness. Believe it or not, you may not want to call it for what it is, but it is what it is. Grumbling and complaining is an outworking of self-pity. It's a sneaky form of selfishness. And we sometimes wield such self-pity as a tool of manipulation. We wield our sacrifices as a weapon to get our way. And we try to steer others by our complaining. We recognize this when we're the target of the manipulation. We know that someone is seeking to steer us by throwing a pity party. And we should ask ourselves hard questions about it, such as, has such manipulation ever brought us deeper into joyful fellowship with the one that's doing the grumbling and complaining? Did it ever call forth the gratitude and joy that it supposedly sought? No, it didn't do anything positive. Nothing positive about it. All negative. But seeing such manipulative grumbling in our spouse, that's the easy part. The hard part is recognizing it in ourselves. Okay? Did you hear that? Because even when I'm talking to you, I'm talking to me. I have to see where any of this applies, to myself, that the Holy Spirit lays in my heart to share with you. So I'll say it again. Seeing manipulative grumbling in a spouse is easy, but the hard part is recognizing it in ourselves, removing that beam from our own eye and treating others, the way that we want to be treated. Remember that one? So ask yourself, how am I doing with my marital obedience? How am I doing with those marital vows? Having and holding in sickness and in health. Husbands, how is your leading and your loving to your wife? Wives, how is your honoring and obeying to your husband? What's the spirit beneath your obedience? What's the spirit? Check it. What's the spirit beneath your obedience? Grumbling and disputing, or glad hearted and grateful? Is there a hitch in your efforts to love and give yourself to your spouse? Do you find yourself muttering under your breath while doing the dishes, or complaining to friends about your husband, or complaining about your wife? This is definitely a no-no for many reasons I won't get into right now, but I will later on down the road somewhere. Are you keeping score? Are you keeping short accounts? Will the record of someone's wrongs from last week follow you and your spouse into the next week? It shouldn't. For many of us, it does, but it shouldn't. It's a very wrong thing to do. Keeping score and carrying it from week to week, week to week, and week to week. We can, widen and press this even into family and parenting. If you're a father, try this scenario. You're in one room working on something, could be your job, could be on your something the wife wanted you to do, and from the other room you hear a quarrel break out, or you hear your kids talk back to their mother, and you listen for a minute to see if it will resolve itself, but then it doesn't. Now, you must interrupt your work and go deal with it. You're the head of the home, and it is your responsibility to reprove, correct, and discipline. You are, and you have resolved to do this and by obeying God. This is a mandate, but will your obedience shine? Are you going to walk into a big mess of sin and bring even more sin into the situation? Because grumbling obedience, frustrated obedience, exasperated obedience is, guess what? Ding, 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 disobedience. As parents, we're called to bring up our children in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord, in the teaching and admonition of Christ. We do pursue that task with joyfulness and gladness of heart. Do we do it heartily as unto the Lord? Or we regularly ask irritably, how many times do I have to remind you to pick up your room, take out this trash? Well, how many times does God have to remind us to shepherd our children with joy and be as a smile to them? The same standard applies to our children. Children, do unto your parents. Honor and obey them all the way and right away and with a happy heart. See, no one is exempt. No one. Or do you want to obey your parents and answer their questions when you want to? No, partial is disobedience. Does your obedience come with a side of back talk. I could go on, but I'm going to stop it right here because I want you to replay this again and listen to it, and maybe you'll even get some further insight into it when you listen to it time and time again before I pick up on it next time and go into even more explanation of partial obedience being disobedience. Good talking to you. Thank you again for listening, and I'll be talking to you soon. You be blessed.